Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar. Today, we're going to talk about 4 ways to visually improve your Excel healthcare dashboards. My name is Scott Everett. I'm the Vice President of Healthcare Solutions with Practical Data Solutions. And today, I'm joined with Colin Villamana. Colin's a PDS Excel data visualization analyst. I don't know, Colin, I prefer to think of you as an Excel artist or an Excel architect. I'm not sure which you prefer.
I think the term Excel guru is most fitting.
Excel guru, great. So, Colin, it's interesting, you talk about you're the Excel guru. When I started with PDS back probably when you were in kindergarten or something, but it was a long time ago, I was the Excel guru, and I used to design dashboards that look like this. It's a good dashboard. It's got good metrics. It's effective. But it's also ugly, coincidentally effective, but also ugly is the first line of my LinkedIn bio. But really, when you look at something like this is an okay dashboard, but I think we can take it and we can make it look a little bit better.
Yeah, so really what we want to talk about today is how we could turn something more like this into something more like this. This sort of version, it actually displays the same metrics as the one you just saw, but this one is much more visual, it's highly engaging, and draws user attention.
Yeah, so today we want to talk about techniques that'll get us there. So we're going to talk a little bit about why Excel. We're going to talk about kind of the 4 techniques that we look at in order to make our dashboards more visual. How we can approach a redesign process if we have dashboards that we want to take to that next level. Then we're going to talk a little bit about really what's involved in being data-driven and bring everything back together again. So, let's talk a little bit about Excel. Colin, I get the emails every week that says, stop reporting with Excel, use this visual tool. And there really is a lot of great visual technology on the market today, with Tableau, with Click, with Power BI, lots of other tools that are out there that are available. But more and more, we're finding organizations still kind of stick with the tried and true Excel. And a lot of times they do it because it's available. Everybody has it. It usually comes standard on a lot of computers with the software suites. It's proven. People have been using it for a long, long time. It's fairly simple. Everybody knows how to use it. You can get there fast. And of course, when you're trying to put data into people's hands, Excel is really a fast and easy way to do it. So what we want to talk about is how we can take Excel, because I think a lot of times people are not maximizing the visual power that can come in Excel. And so we want to talk about some techniques that we can do that. And for the first thing I want to talk about, number one, let's make these dashboards a work of art. And I know that was one of the reasons we brought you in, Colin, to help do that. So what's your approach when we come to you and say, Colin, we really need a new work of art to display?
Yeah, so really what we're talking about here is we're talking about we want to display dashboards with graphs, charts, and images other than just, numbers on a page. So we want to show and we don't want to tell. That very first dashboard that we saw, it was telling us there was just numbers on a page. It wasn't showing us, there was no graphs. But we also want to maximize our use of white space. So we could limit the amount of white space available on the page and to sort of maximize the amount of graphics that we're using. At the same time, though, we want to make these dashboards sort of highly visual and engaging. We want to make them pop. So we could also use colors to sort of convey ideas. Red could equal bad, green could equal good, red could equal denials, green could equal revenue. There's really all sorts of ways we could do this, but again, we just want to make stuff more highly visual. We want to engage the audience.
Yeah, and this is an interesting thing, because I know it can be intimidating that we probably have a lot of people watching this who say, I'm not an artist. Granted, we'll one day be going to the Villamana dashboard exhibit at the Met, but what we want to do is how can we make it a little less intimidating? So here's one example of just a patient satisfaction dashboard. You don't have to be a great artist to be able to put a background in that's just a graphic in the back, and then utilize font size, utilize a couple of graphics that come right within Excel to show the most important metric right there. Our overall patient satisfaction metric really pops off the page. And then you've got some supporting graphs and trends that people can look at as well. I think all of this is really helpful to getting the users to where they want to go. So Colin, I don't know if for what's something that you could help for those who don't necessarily feel they're an artist and are a little intimidated by this concept.
Yeah, so you could actually gather information from the internet. This is an example of a dashboard from the Tableau visual library. And, we really like this design. It really worked for us. So we actually sort of transferred this design and edited it in a way that would work for us with our appointment source dashboard. The general idea just kind of worked for us. We have 4 different elements. Each has its own column and each has its own color. But we sort of tied these elements in a way together using the pie chart.
Yeah, and I really like that pie chart because it's the same pie chart for each one, but each individual metric stands out on this. And we wanted to design this dashboard because we've been preaching is something very important recently to clients and in our webinars, the importance of outreach with regard to patient access, particularly with regard to patients with chronic conditions. And so this is a way to look at it and show what are more patient-driven appointments. So what are our sources of our appointments? What's coming in through our call center? What's coming in through our online portal? Those are ones that the patients are requesting. If we want to look and be more proactive and take back some of our patient access and be a little bit better with the way we're handling our patients with value-based care, we want to be able to do a lot more outreach. And so this helps us to understand what's being done through outreach calls, what's being scheduled in the clinic with regard to follow-up, more practice-driven care. And as we transfer that, this dashboard, I think, was really helpful in being able to show trends. If it's an initiative that goes into the clinics, you can see how things change over time to hopefully satisfy more of that goal of being more proactive. So this was a great look to do something like that. And I think it brings us to number 2 that we want to talk about. And that's, let's feature the most important metrics. I come from, places where I've gone into the board meeting with a big packet of dashboards that show, a bunch of different metrics. And I think those got to be a little overwhelming. I'm not sure how people would manage to all of that. So when we say feature these important metrics, what do you think about with that, Colin?
Yeah, so really what we want to do is we want to draw attention to important metrics. There's probably going to be a metric hierarchy. Some are going to be more important than others. We have different tools that we could actually use to draw attention to different metrics. We have like color, we have shading, font size, we could use KPIs. There's all sorts of ways in which we could achieve our goal. But with this, it's also important to balance analytical and abstract thinking. And with this, we're talking about it's important to consider relationships between different metrics. In a patient sat dashboard, lag isn't an important metric. However, lag can have implications for patient sat. But with all this, we should show only what's important. So, every metric needs to have a reasonable justification to be on the page. In like architecture and design, there's this basic rule of if you can't reasonably justify every single decision that you make, then there really is no reason to have that decision in the first place.
Yeah, and this I think is helpful. So if we bring up an example of again another patient satisfaction dashboard, you can see right away the use of color, the use of font size, the use of just kind of some infographics to draw attention to what we see as important. What's the overall satisfaction rate? And then of course the use of color, with blue is good, yellow is bad. And then when we wanted to get a little bit more granular, we kept that blue and yellow theme. So again, you can find ways where they're doing well, find places where they're struggling, and places that require maybe a little bit of work and where managers need to focus their efforts. One of the things that I like about Excel with this is, since it's patient satisfaction, I didn't want 50% to be, my good and bad line. If I'm doing 50%, I'm doing bad. I wanted it to be 80%. And so I was able to utilize Excel in that to say 80% is where I'm starting my benchmark, and it can be a little bit more difficult to do that in some other tools. And so that's one of the things I liked about the ease of Excel. Another technique that we've utilized to help really emphasize important metrics is what we call our quick answers dashboard.
Yeah, and so the quick answers dashboard is really cool in that it's a great example of just showing important metrics or featuring the most important metrics. So if you look to the left, there's a box with quick answers, and all the rest of the content on the dashboard has to pertain to that box. That's it. That's all we're seeing. So if you look at the first bullet, for instance, it's talking about point of service copays, and then right to the right of it, there's a point of service copays graph. So you have sort of a metric or a question, and then you have sort of the story of the data.
So this dashboard was great, 10 years ago when I designed it to look at copay collection. But nowadays we're talking more with point of service. We don't just want the copays. We're having to deal with more high deductible insurance. We have to deal with more co-insurance. We want to collect patient balances that are out there. So point of service collections is really kind of broadened. But what's great is, we tasked you with something like this, and you created what I think is really one of our more visually stunning dashboards with our point of service collections dashboard.
Yeah, so really what we did there was we took what worked with the quick answers. You have the metric and then the story of the metric. And then we sort of made it so it's all in one spot. It's divided within 5 columns. So we're connecting the ideas with geometry. Instead of cramming my neck and going metric, question, metric, story, metric, story, metric, story, I could actually just see it all right there in one line. This is more visual. It gauges user attention in a more effective way.
Yeah, and I really like the look of this dashboard and the feel. It doesn't necessarily look like Excel, but it really gives a lot of great pertinent information. I think you did a really great job with this one, Colin.
Thank you.
So that brings us to technique number 3, and this is really important as well. Keep it simple. I know this can be overwhelming, again, especially if we're trying to manage to a lot of different things. So how can we keep things a little bit more simple, Colin?
Yeah, so we could always guide the user's focus. We always have these tools in our back pocket. We could use color, we could use font size, geometry, shading, contrast. There's all sorts of ways in which we could guide focus. But this is going to be a balancing act, because if we use too many of these tools, we're going to have too much visual noise. It's going to be hard to make sense of the dashboard. So we need to limit visual noise. Don't use too much of anything. Be sort of consistent in your approach. Finally, though, we should also consider the visual flow. Is there going to be a logic to the design? Is it sort of easy to understand when you look at it? Are there going to be any user interface issues? These are all questions that you need to be considering.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've done is a simple dashboard around a very narrow topic that we would want to give to providers, but one that we find is fairly important is how they're working with patients with chronic conditions. And what we want to do and what we found important is getting them in so that we can get them seen and get them scored throughout the year. So this is a very simple dashboard that focuses just on this, telling the provider kind of their total panel size, how many patients have been in during the year, how many have been scored with a chronic condition, so that they can make sure that an appropriate care plan is implemented, what their average risk score is. And then they can look and see what's still outstanding. So how many do they need to do? Do they need to look at outreach for some of these patients who haven't been in? And they can be able to take a look at this on a monthly basis throughout the year. It's a very simple concept to give very simple information. But again, it's graphical and it's engaging, and it gives the story immediately. I know from an administrative standpoint, we can do something kind of similarly focused around like call center metrics.
Yeah, so this is a really simple dashboard related to call center metrics. And I mean, it's simple, it's easy to understand. There's a KPI to the left, and then there's supporting metrics to the right. You can literally just digest it within a couple of seconds and sort of understand the story of the data. It's clearly divided in the columns, it's consistent, and overall, it's just simple. And that's why we like it.
All right, so that brings us to technique number 4, where we want to talk about making dashboards purpose-driven. And there's a difference between informational dashboards, which are things like your monthly financial statements, your monthly provider productivity reports, things that are just showing the information that we need to see frequently, versus something that's more goal-oriented or a particular initiative that's maybe focused on a very much more narrow gap of things. So Colin, if we come to you with one of these, what's your approach to making things a little bit more purpose-driven?
Yeah, so it's really important that we understand the primary user's needs and objectives. And really what we're talking about here is we really need to understand what stakeholders want. So we need to design dashboards in a way that sort of conveys the logic or the goals they're trying to sort of get at. But we could also drive goals using actionable data. So tools like benchmarks are a perfect example of this. They give us an overall objective to strive for, and they could help drive organizational change. Finally, design choices should reflect users. Different subject matters are going to have their own sort of unique design approach. If you're looking at AR aging, it wouldn't make sense to use a line chart because we're looking at present metrics instead of sort of trends over time.
Yeah, I think you really hit it as well when you talk about the different users or different audiences that may show up for these dashboards. And, let's dig in a little bit on how people might need a little bit more different information. Providers need things that are different than the administrators or executives need. The providers really just need their informational dashboards, maybe some dashboards on particular initiatives that are under their control that they need to see how they're doing. They may need fairly simple things related to their compensation, things like that. But really, in the end, we don't want them spending a lot of time looking at reports. We'd rather have them doing what they do best, and that's caring for our patients. Administrators, executives, they're a little bit different. They may need a greater number of different reports depending upon what the organizational goals are. They may need a little bit more detail than we're giving to the providers. And really, if we're doing a good job, we're not just answering questions for the administrators, executives, we're giving them data that is helping them ask more questions, not just what's going on, but why is it going on? And then they can go down to the operations, finance, analytical team to ask those questions. And that audience is going to need a lot more granular data. They may need to go clear down to detail level to get to that. So really, we need to consider the audience quite a bit. And so when I talk about what administrators might need, they might need a number of reports on fairly narrow subjects, something like staffing metrics. And this is something where they don't need a lot of metrics on this report, and they may even only focus on a couple. I know right now a lot of organizations with staffing shortages are focusing a lot on their recruiting costs as well as on their employee turnover, because those are real costs that are hitting organizations right now that they can limit if they simply find ways to engage their employees a little bit better and limit their employee turnover rates. So this is one thing that works as well. I don't know, there may be other ones that need to be a little bit more broad for executives and administrators around things that are critical. And I know you've done something with revenue integrity, which is really an absolutely critical thing that they need to be looking at fairly frequently.
Yeah, and this is a revenue integrity dashboard. And it's sort of germane in the sense that it's a great example of goal-oriented design. So if you look to the top right, you can see that there's these stoplights. And sort of that conversation on color where we have sort of mental schemas, we're sort of saying, red is bad, green is good. But there's also like a mental schema around a whole stoplight. Like we all have this sort of social understanding that a stoplight means stop, and a stoplight could also mean go. So we're using that sort of idea of like a mental schema. But there's also the coding status chart. And so you have a lower limit and an upper limit. And sort of the position of the bar within those limits tells us the story of the data. So what I'm really trying to say is there's multiple ways to sort of be goal-oriented. You have to be creative. All you have to do is set a normative parameter, and you can find interesting ways to tell the story of the data.
Yeah, and this is one that I think is really critical that we talk about, because as an organization, administrators, executive, revenue cycle directors, really even finance teams, we want to make sure that we're doing the best we can to get, to make the data or the charges as clean as possible so that we're going to turn it into cash. And so this is a way that we can look at all of the factors that go into revenue integrity. We can look at things like our coding status and how well we're doing there. We don't want it to be a compliance issue, but we also want to make sure that we're coding for the maximum that the documentation would support. We also want to talk about denials, where we're preventing denials as much as we can, and where we can't prevent denials, that we're recovering on the back end. We also want to talk about charge lags and getting our charges in faster so that we can take and turn these AR into actual cash that the organization can reinvest to more quality initiatives or expansion or serving their strategic goals. And I think you did a great job of designing this one, because again, it's not overwhelming, but it definitely reflects the importance of something like this. So I actually want to go to a fifth technique. I know we only talked about 4 ways to improve your dashboards, but at PDS we always go above and beyond. So the fifth way is there's some great functionality within Excel that you can incorporate to actually even bring some interactive features in with it. You can look at using things like sliders or drop downs or things like that, where again, I have a good, nice visual dashboard that's here for an administrator, but the administrator could look at it from the top level, but then also look and see, are there outliers within my specialties or my departments or my providers that may be struggling in certain areas that need to be addressed. And so adding these particular features within Excel can really kind of take your dashboards to the next level as well. So Colin, obviously you've done a great job with taking and moving our dashboards to make them a lot more visual, make them a lot more, works of art that are out there. So what's your approach when we come to you and say, Colin, we need a new dashboard and let's work around with this?
Yeah, so I actually originally went to architecture school. So I'm sort of like that little stick figure right there. And basically what I do is I define a problem. So, what is something I want to change? Now I'm going to collect information on that problem. This is going on the internet. This is reading. This is sort of finding ways in which we could solve our issue. Now we're going to develop our own idea of what the solution should look like. So we're just going to sort of come up with a solution. And then finally, we're going to present our ideas for feedback. And it's really important when you're presenting your ideas for feedback that you're getting sort of a diverse set of perspectives, because, I'm not colorblind, but someone that may be colorblind will see the dashboard in a totally different light than me.
That's me. I'm colorblind. So, yeah.
That's why you're great for feedback. But anyways, so this is actually cyclical. We're going to keep doing this over and over and over again. So it's easy to get discouraged. So don't get discouraged if you're ever approaching design in such a way. We've actually implemented this sort of design technique for advanced denials and claims dashboard. And as you could sort of see with this dashboard, it's not very visually appealing. It's very ugly. There's not really a smart use of colors. It looks very similar to that very first dashboard that we saw. It's just numbers on a page. It's telling, it's not necessarily showing.
Yeah, so I designed this dashboard, Colin, a number of years ago. And again, it's effective. Now, to me, the design wasn't the first and foremost thing in my mind. What was important to me was this is a dashboard that tells a story, and I got to have this story. Basically, what I'm trying to show is here are my charges for any given month. Here are the denials that have come and been matched back to those charges. And then I need to know what's been paid, what's been written off, what's still sitting out there with no activity in my active AR. So yeah, while this dashboard can probably be visually improved, I can't lose that story.
Yeah, so in the new sort of design, what we did was we took what worked, which was the story. We love the story.
And threw it away.
We crumpled up. This is the phoenix right here, rising from the ashes. But this, we took this what worked, which was the story, and just made it more visual. So it's very similar to that very first dashboard that we saw. It's a crosstab with just numbers. The dashboard preceding it is a crosstab plus some graphs. There's just more graphs. It's highly visual. This might look like an Easter basket, but really what we're trying to get at is we're trying to gauge user attention with graphs and visuals.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I appreciate the spring theme here, Colin. It's a little more relaxing, which I need when I'm looking at denial reports. But one of the things that I appreciate is, again, that story's still there. And it's there in a more visual way, especially just with you adding the tick marks there at the end, which are, helpful to me to, be able to understand the trends that I need to see, and really showing that and being a little bit more visual. Another way that we brought in to redesign something was an older dashboard that was around a very narrow topic regarding charge edits. Okay. Charge edits is something that is critical for me to know because it can be an emergent situation very quickly that I need to correct. But most of the time it's not. Most of the time I need to be able to look at this, make a judgment in seconds and then get on with my day. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this particular report. So I know you did a great redesign of this one as well.
Of course I did. But I don't want to talk necessarily about that design back there, because that older design it doesn't really do what this design does. And this design really does, it focuses the user on important metrics. So if you look to the left, there's these important KPIs, and they have a lot of page real estate, and they use color to draw attention. But at the same time, the edits by charge sort of chart does the same exact thing. We're highlighting the most, expensive charges. We're focusing really on what's important and just drilling down to that important metric.
Yeah, and again, my color blindness appreciates you using shading there, Colin, to help highlight areas of again, urgent attention that might be needed. But really, I like being able to look at this, couple of seconds, we're fine, move on. That's how I want to do this. Now, let's talk a little bit about why we're doing this. And the reason we're trying to do this is we want information to be in the hands of the right people so that our organization can be data-driven. What we don't want to do is overwhelm people with data. Now, what we mean by data-driven, I know it's a buzzword that you'll hear in every single healthcare article that you read. It'll be in every presentation that you hear, every webinar you attend. Data-driven right now is what organizations are being pushed to. And what we mean by that is we're trying to eliminate any inherent biases that people may have by only utilizing the data to tell us what's going on within the organization. So we try to get data to people continuously so that they can take and utilize that to manage effectively. They use it to uncover opportunities for improvement, things that they need to work on, whether it's urgent, whether it's more strategic. And then, of course, once they start making changes, they want continual insights from that data to make sure the performance is improving in the way that they would like to see. Now, this is a really easier said than done. And I know, Colin, that a lot of organizations are still kind of struggling to get there.
Yeah, so, analytics, it's complicated. It's really difficult. And the most obvious, reason why organizations aren't necessarily data-driven is staff resources. Economists always say scarcity is the big problem. But at the same time, expertise is an issue. This is why we like to talk about Excel. It doesn't require a lot of expertise. A lot of people, they kind of know it. It's easy to learn. They've already been trained on it. It's also just low cost. So it's just an all-around good tool. Change isn't as simple as a snap of the fingers. Analytics can be intimidating, but it's important that organizations implement the correct level of analytical intensity.
So if we're trying to become more data-driven in our organizations, we need to really understand what are the levels of analytical intensity that are out there. And what we want to do is we want to move from data summarization, like I did in those original dashboards that I created. And you've done a better job of making it more trend related so that it adds a little bit more context, makes sure we're going in the right direction. Obviously, applying benchmarks can help apply additional context of really how well are we doing as an organization compared to best practices. We can get into relationships and look at the interplay between metrics and correlations and how they impact each other. And of course, that highest level of analytical intensity is, moving towards projections. So again, we can't take this all at once. A lot of times when we start working with a new client, the first thing we want to do is help them move up this analytical intensity by encouraging them to incorporate and utilize benchmarks just for context purposes. But we can really make utilizing benchmarks a visual journey as well.
Yeah. So what's really cool with this dashboard is that it uses KPIs and it uses color to sort of illustrate just to illustrate benchmarks. So if we see in the actual column, the color is determined by its relationship with the goal or the HFMA. Oh, I always butcher that word, HFMA. But what's so cool about this dashboard is that it also showcases important metrics. So if you look at the top, we also have these sort of KPIs that stand on their own that also tell the story of the data.
Yeah, and one of the reasons we look to benchmarks first is because incorporating benchmarks can actually be a fairly simple way to move us to even that highest level of analytical intensity which is what we call our performance opportunity dashboards. And these are some of the first dashboards I designed at PDS. And it's something that's still very popular with a lot of our clients, where what we're trying to do is leverage those data summarizations that we looked at. We have what we know. So we know our total annual collections. We know our total work RVU. We can calculate a payment per work RVU. We can show kind of what's going on, incorporate clinical FTE to normalize things, but then we can incorporate a benchmark. And then we can show, okay, well, we'll project out and we'll show financially what would happen for the organization if each provider increased by just 5%, benchmarking against themselves. Or if we did an internal benchmark, what would happen if the providers who were below the average of the department were performing at that average level? What would be the financial impact of that? Or what would happen if all of the providers were performing at the national specialty average or at the 75th percentile? We've done this around things like RVU productivity, around clinic visits, around E&M coding, around charge lags, around AR collection. All of these areas have a financial impact in the revenue cycle if we can find improvement opportunities, and this is a good way to do it. But that said, again, this is not very visually appealing. So probably improved on this one as well, haven't you, Colin?
Of course I have.
Of course you have.
So pretty much what we've done is we maintain that story of, comparing to the benchmark. So if you look at the total WRVU by physician, we could see that there's each provider, and we could see clearly how they could compare to sort of the division, the department, or just the benchmark in general. But then we're also keeping sort of that important opportunity data. This is how they're going to, this is what's going to happen if XYZ performs to the benchmark. So at the top, we can see clearly the very important KPIs that tell us the rest of the story.
Yeah, so, we've talked a lot today about, again, the advantages of Excel, why people are still using Excel. We've shown that it can be a very, very effective and powerful visual tool as well. But I think we'd be a little bit remiss to say one of the downsides to using Excel is it can be a very manual process. And so, we know a lot of times it can be really time consuming to collect all of this data and format it the way we want it. It can, if we're taking and we're copying, pasting information into 20, 50, 100 different provider dashboards, can be extremely error prone to make sure we're copying the right data and make sure we're putting it in exactly the right cells. And then, of course, it can be difficult to disseminate this information to everybody in the organization. And so one of the things that we've really found that organizations are looking for and moving towards are automation tools. And automation really can provide a significant cost savings to organizations that are trying to utilize Excel for a lot of their reporting, or for the certain audiences that are still getting dashboards in Excel, which still makes a lot of sense. And so, if you're a PDS client, obviously that's where PDS Dash comes into play. Other tools out there for automation are definitely coming into play to help organizations see there really is kind of a significant cost savings that can come from automation and doing things correctly. Now, when we talk about the data collection as well, really it's important to talk about that single source of truth. And the way it comes through from your analytical tools, no matter what you're utilizing, again, if you're utilizing, Tableau, Power BI, whatever you want, there's different layers to the different tools that are out there. So you have your visualization layer, which is what we've been talking about today. What are the reports that people are receiving? But then when there are further questions, there needs to be a slice and dice capability for people to go in, dig in, identify outliers, see what's going on. And then, of course, our detail reporting is, when we may need to get down to invoice or patient level detail. The thing that we really recommend for everybody is no matter which tool you utilize, you want an integrated tool that allows you to move back and forth between all of them seamlessly. It's a little bit difficult when you're using one tool for one piece and another tool for another, and you have to kind of recreate that query on both sides that may not be hitting different data sources. So your filters may not, be exactly the same either place. So really make sure that you want to have an integrated tool set to be able to look at this, what we call our analytics trio. So bringing everything together, Colin, we talked in a webinar a few months ago about, different areas of the revenue cycle and ways that, we can find improvements there that can help the organization. And the issue that we saw with that is a lot of times this data can seem like it's really siloed. And it seems like only one person needs to look at that. But what we talked about in that webinar is really all of this is kind of a Venn diagram that we're not really managing to siloed areas. We're trying to manage to one great whole. Now, okay, we got a Venn diagram. It's a circular Venn diagram. It looks great. Excel's a square rectangular world. This couldn't be a dashboard, could it?
Of course it can't. So pretty much what we've done is we've took these sectional ideas and we combine them in a way that's meaningful. So when we do combine them, we find that all these the siloed data has a sort of relationship in the sense that they all share patient count, ease of access, would recommend appointments, etc. There's a relationship between the siloed data. And what's so cool about this dashboard is it kind of displays sort of a hierarchy of metrics. So it could be sort of inference that appointments is more important than schedule utilization because, appointments has implications for patient access, but it also has implications for productivity. And that's really what's so cool about this dashboard.
Yeah, I think when I look at this is something that I think really illustrates a point that we always make. But it's very important is that when you have your patients at the center of the things that you do, like we have here, it really kind of shows how everything else kind of falls into place. When we're focusing on our patients, we need to make sure that they're satisfied with the care that they're receiving, with the outcomes that they're getting, with the quality of care. We need to make sure that our providers are accessible, that they feel that they're accessible, that we're being productive that way. But we also need to make sure that we're being productive and financially responsible so that we can be there for our patients when they need us. And so really looking at all of this kind of speaks to what we say, take care of the patients first and everything else falls into place. I'd like to go ahead and call attention to, if you like more information on PDS dashboards, we have a web series on our website that you can look at called the PDS Dashboard of the Month, where we highlight different dashboards every month and in 3 to 5 minutes kind of walk you through the metrics that are in it and why they're important. For those of you who are clients, again, you can access these particular dashboard templates and PDS Dash will help you to automate the creation and bursting of these reports as well. So thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate your time and hope to see you in further webinars that we may have. If you want to look at our past webinars, they are available on our website as well as our YouTube channel. So thank you for joining us, everybody.
Thank you.